Sensory breaks in an IEP just aren't good enough. Let's talk about it on this episode of the Special Education Inner Circle podcast. I'm your host, Catherine Witcher, and I love building better IEPs with parents and teachers who are ready to dig in and really change things up. Really look at what is next when it comes to special education and what is possible. And I work inside of this master IEP coach community where I train parents and teachers to build better IEPs. And that means looking at the details because the small details make a big difference. Now, inside of the IEP, a lot of times we see something that says sensory breaks. Sensory breaks are supposed to be the support that is going to help a child be regulated and access their education. And it's supposed to be like this magical thing. Like, we'll just do sensory breaks and everything will be okay. That's not how it works. Sensory breaks are something that are necessary for a lot of students, but we have to make sure that we are doing this correctly. I'm going to show you one of my favorite tools that can be a game changer in the whole process of developing more sensory integration throughout the day, and it's called a hoglet. And if you don't know what a hoglet is, you're going to know in just a few minutes, and then stay tuned because I have a way for you to get a hoglet. Like, I'll send it to you. I'll tell you how in just a few minutes. But let's talk about this sensory break inside the IEP. If you were to open up your child's IEP, or teachers, if you were to open up the IEPs, especially the ones that you're inheriting from another teacher, and you were to go to your supports, your services, accommodations, modifications, behavior plans, all different places, okay, we see things like sensory breaks. And it's important this year for you to really dig in and say, what does that mean? Start questioning everything. That's what I teach master IEP coaches all the time. Just question things all the time. That is not a pushback. That is not creating conflict. Asking questions is learning how to do things better and how to communicate in a way that's going to create change. So when we see sensory breaks inside of an IEP, I first want to ask, why? Why? Like, what's the purpose? Like, what's happening? What's happening that we need to have sensory breaks? And once we find out what's happening, we say, okay, now what is a sensory break? Like, what's the definition of this sensory break for this child? And we may not know. See, here's the thing. When we develop an IEP, we're developing it on current data, right? So what if that data has changed? What if the child has had a big leap in their milestones, in their growth, in their maturity, in their ability to access their education, and those sensory breaks that were for last year, they just don't make sense for this year. In fact, sometimes when we don't evolve the sensory break to meet the child where they're at, it causes more chaos. It causes more meltdowns. It causes more stress and more disruption for the child because they're like, I don't need this. Why are you doing this? So it's important for us to figure out what's the purpose of it. Does the child still need it? What does it look like for who the child is right now? Those types of breaks and the different things that may have worked in the past may not be working now. And that's where we can start to integrate some new tools and take some new data and see, do we actually need a break or do we need more integration? So let me show you what a hoglet is. A hoglet is a fidget mouse, meaning computer mouse, right? So for those of you who are listening and you're not seeing the video, I'm holding in my hand a computer mouse, but not just any computer mouse. It has this really cool texturized cover to the mouse. So it's a USB mouse. And so here, let me just show you. It's so fun. So you're able to integrate a sensory tool like the hoglet into the child's day. So it's not something that necessarily they have to take a break to go get this input or some, just some tools that might help with regulating emotions or regulating just their body or their mind. But it's being able to integrate it into the day. So it's like, yes, this is something that I don't have to stop. I can keep going on things that many times our students, they want to keep learning. Our children, they want to keep learning, but they just can't, right? They're having a struggle. So if we can integrate things that help them get through their struggle and not have to stop and start when they don't want to, this is a great solution for that. So, all right, if you would like a hoglet, I've got a few that I can send your way. You're going to go to masteriepcoach.com/podcast. Okay, so you're listening right now to the Special Education Inner Circle podcast, but I have a hidden podcast where I've gathered together 20 master IEP coaches, and they've built IEP trainings for you that you can have. You can have that. All right. So it's this private, secret podcast where we've collaborated inside of the Master IEP Coach community. And I built this for you so you can access trainings on the go, all 15 minutes or less. So you go to masteripcoach.com/podcast. And here's what's going to happen. This week, I'm going to send out an email to everybody who has signed up to listen to the podcast. Remember, it's free. Okay. I'm going to send out an email and I'm going to say, I have Hoglets. I have Hoglets and I'm going to send out. And here's how you can do this. So there's going to be some steps inside that email. So if you would love a Hoglet, which you can go grab them on Amazon, I'm going to have the link for this too. Make sure you can go get your own on Amazon for sure. Okay. And then I'm also going to have some for you that I can send to you. So masteripcoach.com/podcast. You're going to want to get the private podcast, and then you'll get the secret steps to get a Hoglet or to be entered to get a Hoglet. Okay. So, all right, let's get back to sensory breaks. So we just talked about sensory breaks not good enough when it's just written on the IEP. We need to know, what are the sensory breaks? How long are the sensory breaks? What do the sensory breaks look like? What's the data from last year? Who is the child this year? Is this going to work this year? And we're going to do all of this prep work just for sensory breaks, right? But it's so important. There's been so many times that I've been called into schools. So I've been doing this for 25 years where I work with parents and I help them through the IEP process. And then I work with schools and I do consulting. And a lot of times I'm called in when there's a crisis. I'm called in when it's like, okay, listen, can you come help us out? We've got some parents that are not so happy. We can't quite troubleshoot everything. We really want a third party to come in and just kind of build some bridges between home to school and figure out what's happening. So I do that by going in and observing in the school and saying, okay, what's going on? And I build, trust and relationship with the teachers, because I'm never going to throw a special education teacher under the bus. I was a special education teacher in the classroom, so I understand what's happening on a lot of different levels. But it's also helpful, right, to figure out, okay, what else can you do? Because when you're in the trenches, you can't always see everything yourself, right? Having another set of eyes is good. So I went into this one situation where, things were just a bit out of control, and the teacher and the team, they needed help. The parents weren't happy, and sensory breaks were a big part of this. So the children were taking sensory breaks in areas that were not appropriate, meaning like stairwells. And it's not because, it was like, oh, let's go hide and go do sensory breaks in the stairwells. They were having trouble with space inside of the school campus. So it's an elementary school. They didn't have enough space for a lot of things. And because the team did not have training, and when I say the team, I mean everybody. I mean, the therapists and the paraprofessionals and the general education teachers, because they didn't have training on sensory breaks and what they can do and how effective they can be and how they can be implemented and how we can take data and how we can continue to prove those. They were doing the best they could, but it wasn't working. So we had to find some new space and we had to find some new activities. And that included finding some strategies that we could integrate within the day that did not take up a lot of space. That is, just another benefit here, right, of the Hoglet, of that we can integrate it into the day. And it's not something that's going to take up a lot of space. It's not something that we need a ton of training on, right? So we want easy tools that we can implement in general education, that we can use within our therapy settings, that we can use at home, because the consistency between home and school is so good, right? So we want things that we can integrate in when it comes to sensory supports. So the child has consistency and they can build some routines for their own mind and body and helping themselves be regulated so they can access their education. It's also really, really important for us to understand that sensory breaks are not earned, nor does the child need to ask for them. Now, sometimes we're going to have that expectation that a child's going to learn how to ask, I need a break, and really advocate for themselves and take that initiative in doing that advocacy. But many times a child does not have that self-awareness or that maturity yet to do that. So we're never going to say, well, the child doesn't use sensory breaks because they never ask for them. No, unless we have data to show that the child has the skill level to ask for their sensory break when they need it, we're going to make sure that we're initiating using data to see what does the child need and how can we be proactive. Now, getting a child involved in designing their sensory breaks, so very important. That's a great way for a child to have self-advocacy. I know we want children to speak up. What do you need? Speak up for this. But when we can involve them in the prep work, when they're in a good place, right? Like they're having a good day, and we can talk about what do they need and what makes them feel better and what helps them, feel like they can, complete their work without a high level of frustration, and get them in on a plan for like, okay, this is how we're going to make sure that you can have everything you need to access your education, to have fun at recess, to make sure that you are participating in your classes, with your friends the way that you want to. So getting buy-in from students, so very important, right? Getting them in on the plan. This is the last one, but I'm just going to bring it up again. Hoglet, right? I don't know a child that is like, no, absolutely not. I don't want to touch a hoglet. It's not going to happen. I'm telling you. There are definitely parents who have purchased the hoglet, and they purchased it for their child who, needs some more sensory integration throughout the day. And then they have to buy another one for the siblings because it's that much fun. And it just becomes, again, something that a child wants to integrate into their day because it makes them feel better. And quite honestly, it's just cool, right? So I want to encourage you, open up that IEP, take a look at it. If you see sensory breaks, start digging in and asking why and how and who's going to do it and who's trained and does the child still need this and where is the child at? And just start making that list of questions that's appropriate for that child. Start digging into how can we get the child involved in creating their own sensory supports. And instead of always thinking of it as a break, what can we do to make sure that we're integrating sensory supports throughout the day so a child can access their education, so they can get that appropriate education to meet their unique needs, to prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. Now, don't forget, I have some hoglets to give to you. So go to masteripcoach.com/podcast, sign up for that secret free Master IEP Coach podcast, and get some additional IEP trainings. And everybody who has signed up is going to get an email within the next week that's going to share with you how you can enter to win a hoglet. Now, if you're listening to this and then you're like, this was posted a long time ago, and I'm sure all those hoglets are gone, you're still going to want to go to masteripcoach.com/podcast and sign up for that secret podcast, because hoglets aren't the only thing that I have. So our listeners to our private podcast get access to things that everybody out here, they don't always have access to. It's a smaller group. When you sign up for this masteripcoach.com/podcast, this secret podcast, I know that you're all in. I know that you want to know all the things about special education, and you're serious about learning different strategies at a level that is advanced. It's more than what you're Googling. It's more than what somebody else is telling you, is happening in your school district. It's about getting to that bigger picture of becoming a leader at the IEP table. And if that sounds like you, go get access to that free podcast. And then you're going to check out the hoglet links. And then you're going to stay tuned for what else is coming up this school year, because it's so much fun. I cannot wait to see you more here on the Special Education Inner Circle podcast and behind the scenes on the Master IEP Coach podcast at masteripcoach.com/podcast.